I am Julie Reeder, and we are here with former Congressman Darrell Issa, who is running for the 50th District. Hello.
Hi, Julie. How are you?
Issa. Good. First thing I want to ask is, why do you want to run again? You served for, what was it, 18 years?
18 years.
In the 49th?
48 and 49,
Okay.
as the numbers keep changing.
Right.
And it's interesting because when I served in the 48th, it included a big chunk of what is now the 50th. When I served in the 49th, for the next 10 years, it included a large chunk of the 50th. And that's the nature of gerrymandering,
Right.
is that as they keep dividing things up, with small exceptions, each of us is representing somebody else's district. As a matter of fact, Ken Calvert and I have traded constituents twice now.
Wow.
But you know, only one party controls the redistricting, and it's not Republicans. But you know, I never stopped wanting to serve. After 2016, the president-elect asked me to come to Trump Towers, and we discussed my going into the administration at that time. One of the challenges was this was a district that was a district that President Trump did not win. Hillary Clinton got about 9% more votes than the president did. And so the idea of a special election that we would guaranteed lose just didn't make any sense. And so, to paraphrase the president, we'll bring you in the second round. And that meant serve out my term, select something that I could be helpful to the president with, and we did that. And so over the next few months, we selected the Trade Development Agency, which is an independent, autonomous agency that brings infrastructure and honest process for bidding for infrastructure, whether it's ports, electricity, water, to the developing world. Big program in the sense of what it accomplishes, but also one where you network with all the trade agencies and the aid agencies, and one that I could then do other jobs for the president from. We agreed to it. He nominated me while I was still a member. I gave notice that I would not be running for re-election, fully expecting by August or September to be confirmed, but we ran into Senator Menendez and the Senate obstruction by the Democrats, and they postponed and delayed, refusing to even meet with me for a year. Now I should be offended, except they did it to 40 or 50 other foreign affairs nominees. And so when the president was out here, and obviously it was becoming obvious that there would be a vacancy in the 50th, I talked to the president. Actually, he rode me back on Air Force One, and we discussed how I could be helpful by returning to Congress and returning to Jim Jordan, Mark Meadows, and many of us that had worked closely together, and supporting the president. As a matter of fact, if I went into this particular administration position, if it ever got cleared, I would actually be covered by the Hatch Act and wouldn't be able to help the president in his reelect. So that made the decision that being able to both help the president around the country in the reelect and ensure that this stayed a conservative seat in conservative hands was a win-win. And so I got the president's okay and the vice president's okay. 2 days later in the Oval, we met and agreed to it.
So you never actually got to serve in the agency?
Blocked for a full year by the ranking member, the lead Democrat, under the foreign affairs rules. They essentially give a veto to the top Democrat. And you know, he was a big Hillary Clinton supporter, perhaps objected to my holding her accountable on Benghazi. And not to disparage my colleague in the Senate, but he's only a senator because he got a hung jury on his corruption charge. And he was still sanctioned by his own party. So this is a person that I question whether anyone should listen to, but that's the Senate rules.
Yeah. So your tie to the 50th is that you used to serve, this used to be part of your district anyway, but in addition to that, your business and...
I started when I came back to California in 1985 from Cleveland, my first facility for many years was in San Marcos. Many of my former employees were from San Marcos, Escondido, all the way up to Temecula. And that's one of the things about this district is it's 2/3 North County. So for most of my career, I represented Fallbrook, Bonsall, where I have a house and my current residence, but Temecula all the way up to Paris. And that's the strange thing about the debate that's going on, is I've represented more of this district for longer than anybody else in the race. And I'm tied to this district. The economy of 2/3 of the district, which is North County, including the portion of Riverside that we think of as Temecula, we're an economic dynamo. We're 800,000 people. That's twice the size of Cleveland. And if there were no San Diego, nobody would be saying this is anything other than a metropolis. Yeah. The district also, through gerrymandering, winds down and includes East County. And that's where, for decades, Duncan Hunter Sr., Duncan L. Hunter, represented that district close to the wall, close to the border. And that's included in it. It's about 1/3 of it. And it's an important third. As a matter of fact, it would give me 2 Indian tribes I didn't previously have. But the many tribes, whether it's Pechanga or the Valley Indians or everyone almost to Agua Caliente, I have a long history of working those federal issues.
What years did you serve in the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee?
I came to the Oversight Committee from a seniority standpoint. They have one set, but the actual day I started, it was the first day of my 3rd term. I was somebody who came to Congress determined to be on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And for my first 2 years, I was on Judiciary, Foreign Affairs, and Small Business. And then I got on the Energy and Commerce Committee. And I discovered that as important as it is, that it was slow moving and I missed the action. And the then chairman, Tom Davis, just coming in as chairman, asked me if I would consider going to oversight, because I've been a businessman. I understood that no matter how good your sales force is, no matter how good your product is, if you don't audit it, you may not end up with anything at the end of the day. Right. And so he asked me to come on board, and I did, which was an unusual selection. I gave up service on the Energy and Commerce Committee to go and do oversight, returning to 2 of the other committees, Judiciary and Foreign Affairs. And for the rest of my career, that's what I've been doing. And what I discovered was that holding government accountable and finding ways to make government more transparent is, in some ways, the most important job. The first commission ever of Congress was asked for by George Washington because he needed Congress to investigate failures of his generals. Mm-hmm. And when you look back through it, we all think about the appropriator because the appropriator, says, I got you the money. And that's important. We all think about the taxing authority because they determine what is taken from us involuntarily. But at the end of the day, when you have $4 trillion, almost $5 trillion of your tax dollars being spent, 1 out of every $4 in America is spent by the government. Holding government accountable to do what they have agreed to do on behalf of the American people is in some ways more important than all the others. And that's how I discovered that I had a niche, a calling, if you will. And it's one of the reasons I accepted the position with the president for the Trade Development Agency, is it was trying to take some of those same principles to the often corrupt developing world and saying, we can get you better product, we can get you better ports, we can get you electricity that works and water that's clean, if we can teach you how to do the process of, if you will, procurement honestly. And sometimes with dollars from America, but often with dollars that are being misspent of theirs. And that includes, by the way, Mexico, which continues to be a country that underperforms for its people what we would like to see.
So what were some of the issues that you investigated and handled when you were on that oversight committee?
Well, the interesting thing is that the Oversight Committee has a mandate to look at anything, anywhere, anytime. And because of that, you focus very broadly. It's almost like a lens that looks 360 degrees. So we did things such as look into the countrywide scandal and dig into how not the American people were cheated, but that was obvious, but how bribes, if you will, free refinancing to members of Congress and their staff had led to legislation that really wasn't what it should have been.
Wow.
Congress let you down, but Angelo Mazzillo and Countrywide had been basically handing out favors, financial favors, to both members and staff, and we investigated that. We did that while I was in the minority, while I was a minority leader. But sometimes you do things, and I'm a conservative Republican, but sometimes you do things on that committee that you don't expect to do. Under Chairman Henry Waxman, when the Democrats were in control, we exposed that in the Iraq War, billions of dollars of US $20 bills had been handed out and gone missing. And it was a real wake-up call that for all the good intention of the Department of Defense, sometimes they're not thinking. And so we feel very free to look at everything. Of course, most people would know my investigations of Benghazi, Fast and Furious, where Brian Terry was killed with weapons that were provided by us to the drug cartels under Eric Holder. Obviously, Lois Lerner and the abuse of conservatives and libertarians and pro-Israel people, and for which we held her in contempt. Those are high profile, and everyone gets it. Even the investigation that led to the server that Hillary Clinton had in her own house, instead of complying with a federal law called the Federal Records Act, which she was well aware of and simply disobeyed. So those kinds of...
There was a new development on that I heard this morning. A Judicial Watch they've reopened a case.
Yeah, they have additional FOIA that they're getting. Judicial Watch and some of the outside groups we worked hand in hand with. This is where years of experience, you begin working with groups who want the same transparency you want. Not always conservative groups, but want the same transparency. And often they'll use FOIA and you'll use subpoena, and between the two, you get better discovery, and that continues to be the case. But I did over 1,200 investigations during my chairmanship. And that's the important thing about the committee is...
That was over how many years?
4 years as chairman, 2 years as ranking member. And I'm proud of both, because my time with Ed Towns, when he was chairman, we got a lot done. And that's one of the tricks of the trade, if you will, is that Elijah Cummings and I, for example, when he was my ranking member, we sent 40 pieces of legislation to the President Obama, that he signed. And it included the first modernization of our federal IT procurement in a generation. It included what's called the Data Act, which is a major implementation of modern systems that allow both government and the private sector to dig into this vast amount of information and get meaningful information. And both of those are examples where it's bipartisan. They certainly would hate to see some things that get mined on Obama, and probably people hate to see some things get mined under President Trump. But as Congress, it was really good legislation. And I worked with Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, a former businessman though, to get that legislation passed. And so there's legislation, there's investigation, and then when I say 1,200, many of these investigations, you open it up, you work with an inspector general, they resolve it, you close it. And so the ones you didn't hear about are almost as important as the ones you did, because each one represents an ability to hold government accountable. And some of them, you resolve them, but you still hold a hearing. And I'll give you one for your viewers. There was an individual at the EPA, high ranking, who pretended to be a CIA agent. He not only pretended to be a CIA agent, but what he would do is he'd say, I'm going on a mission, and EPA would pay for his first class tickets to fly around the world for vacations for a decade or more.
Wow.
And then he retired, but continued to do it on the EPA's dime because he was a CIA agent. And the EPA administrator, who had been with him and known him for years, acted like she could not have known he was a fake, even though, as the head of the EPA, Gina McCarthy could have called the CIA and said, is this guy actually an agent? Never did. So even as he was going to jail, we still held hearings, brought him before Congress, so the American people would understand, and over 1 million federal workers would understand, you fake something, you may just well be held accountable. And my only regret is that he didn't go to prison for the same number of years that he pretended to be a CIA agent and flew around the world first class on your dime.
So were you surprised by IG Horowitz's report talking about all the 51 things that the FBI had done wrong?
Michael is the head of all 74 inspector generals, and I've worked with him for more than a decade. He's frustrating because he's meticulous and slow, but he's very good. During my tenure, for example, he came before Congress, and this is while he's working for Eric Holder as the Inspector General, and testifies that Eric Holder, the Attorney General, is blocking him from holding attorneys at the Department of Justice accountable for discrimination, harassment, and the like. That's a pretty brave guy. So, his willingness to see the truth, research it carefully, slower sometimes than you'd like, and reach a conclusion and publish it bravely, absolutely love it. Now, he'll also frustrate you by being completely honest. When he says no evidence of XYZ, you have to read it very carefully, because what he's saying is, it's obvious there's prejudice, but I don't have the tangible evidence necessary to bring a criminal charge.
And does he even have subpoena power?
He has, and that's one of the problems in the IG Act, and we modernized it. We had a major upgrade in the Inspector General Act during my tenure. We could not get President Obama to give us one more thing that if I go back, I intend on getting. But he has the power, but he only has the power over current employees of the agency he oversees.
Okay.
So it's a stovepipe.
So he has to take people's word for it. I mean, if they tell him.
Oh, no. He within his agency, he has great authority. One of the challenges is, as you know, when he was investigating the FBI, and that's why the Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney from Connecticut are important, because they're looking at all of government.
Right.
What Michael Horowitz was able to do was look at the Department of Justice. He can't look at the CIA. He can't look at other agencies outside the Department of Justice. And that's important because, and he doesn't have authority over former employees. So Page and Strzok and others who have left, he can't force them. So I think his report was exhaustive within his capability. It also, what it really does is it gives the American people an understanding that there's enough wrongdoing there for the Attorney General to continue investigating and come up with the indictments that I think will occur.
And that would happen under Durham?
Yes.
Okay. So Attorney General Durham.
Or U.S. Attorney Durham.
U.S. Attorney Durham. Okay. So do you have any expectations from that there will be indictments that will roll? Because up to now, the investigations, they found that people have lied and that there's been all kinds of wrongdoing, but nobody's really been held accountable.
This is the frustration that Congress sometimes doesn't do a good job explaining. As a matter of fact, one of the candidates in this race is saying, well, you did these investigations, but nothing happened. In a democracy, in our republic, the most important thing that we deal with as Congress is making the American public, the voter, aware, because they make the ultimate decision every 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years, depending upon the office. And so where the successes are of Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows, in the past, Trey Gowdy and myself, Doug Collins, all of these people, where the successes are, have we informed you? Have we informed your viewers? Have we informed the public? And by the way, have we informed the people who have criminal prosecution? And I would say that we've done a good job in the past, and I think we're doing a great job today. And I expect that we can do an even better job in the future because the technology is improving for us to do it. But let's just take Hillary Clinton and Benghazi. It was a lot of work, and we were up against stonewalling by the administration. Or Fast and Furious, where we literally had the Attorney General. He was never going to prosecute anyone, including himself. And
Will you explain what Fast and Furious is? Just
the Fast and Furious program was a gun-running program where the Attorney General, through his U.S. Attorney in Phoenix, deliberately allowed straw purchases to buy massive amounts of weapons, 2,000, mostly assault weapons, and even 50 caliber, these sniper rifles that could destroy a vehicle or an airplane at a mile, allowed them to be sold to the cartels in Mexico.
what was the reasoning for that?
There's two reasonings that make sense. One is the one they stated, that they were going to somehow follow them and bust the cartels.
Okay.
Now, you give somebody a gun, all you really know is that the cartels have your gun. I'm not sure where that made any sense, and they had no process to roll up some kingpin, and they never did. The other one, which is the one that we believed, the U.S. Attorney in Phoenix had a history of being, in the Clinton administration, involved in the assault weapons ban. And our belief, it wasn't what the investigation was about, but our belief of why they did it started becoming that what they were doing is allowing this to go on, and then as more and more of these weapons could be documented as U.S. weapons used in drug activities, get an assault weapons ban. And it was clear the Obama administration wanted to get assault weapons banned. This blew up, they didn't. But each of these events, and we'll just take Benghazi and the servers, Hillary Clinton lost Michigan by 10,000 votes. The outcome of the election is less than 50,000 votes in a couple of states, and she'd be president. So if you're in Michigan, and we've shown you how corrupt she is, how much she lies, how little respect she had for the requirements to safeguard classified information. Do you think that made a difference of 10,000 votes? And if it did, then we prevented a bad president from a bad person from becoming president, and we did so by simply exposing what she had done wrong, which is the most honest way. We weren't politicking. When we began this investigation, she was the Secretary of State, not a candidate for president. But by the time election day came, the American people knew her well enough to not vote for her. So in a democracy, informing an electorate that then votes, if they vote with more information, we've done our job. It's nice if you can get a conviction. Former FBI Director Comey came before my committee, Judiciary, and lied to us. And I called him out for being a liar over the San Bernardino, the iPhone that was found there, and his claim that he needed to essentially get a backdoor into that phone, paid for, done by Apple so that he could then snoop on everyone's phones remotely and they wouldn't know it. He was asking for that and claiming that was the only way to get the information off his phone. I called him out for it. He was telling an untruth. He stumbled a little bit, and a few days later, suddenly there were printouts of people at MIT, I think it was, telling him how to do it for a couple $100. He quickly paid an Israeli company to get that phone's information so he'd find out what was on it. But he hasn't been held accountable for those lies or lots of others. And of course, he's up to here in the Pfizer abuse of spying on the president's campaign. So would I like to see him held accountable? Yes. I would like everyone who comes before Congress and knowingly lies to be held accountable the way they are if they lie to the FBI.
Well, and even changing evidence, in the case of Carter Page, where they called CIA and asked the CIA, is he an asset for you? And they said yes. And then one of their attorneys changed the answer to no so that they could So that they could surveil a U.S. citizen, which is illegal, right?
Julie, it's not illegal because a judge ordered it. It is illegal to lie to a judge.
But that's why you have to go to the FISA court.
Right. So what they did under our law is completely legal. What they did was break a law to get a federal judge to give them a legal surveillance. There's nothing illegal about surveillance because the federal judge made that decision, and we trust those judges to be fair arbitrators. But if you lie to a federal judge, if you bring him false evidence, then in fact you've committed a crime that has caused him to issue a lawful subpoena that is erroneous. That's what happened there. So when I look at why the judge ordered it, he ordered it because the evidence appeared appropriate. Given the truth, I'm confident he wouldn't have. And I've been involved in the Patriot Act and the FISA reform. As a matter of fact, somewhere here I have a picture of us on a bipartisan basis standing behind the president for the signing of that reform. And we reformed the Patriot Act a total of twice now because of abuses we've found to your liberties, and it needs reformed again. There's always a balance between the need for investigations, particularly foreign terrorists, and your civil liberties, your rights under the Constitution. And after 9/11, on a vastly bipartisan basis, people took steps, and year after year, we've had to carefully look at abuses and mistakes and roll them back. And that struggle is going to continue in the next Congress. And I will say that that's one where somebody has to lead, but they won't lead alone. Members of Congress on both sides of the aisle can come together and make those changes.
What do you think of the impeachment process as well as what the outcome is going to be?
One of the interesting things is that the I word has been used so often, and people have asked me over the years why we didn't impeach people. And I've never called for impeachment. I've called for people to be fired. I've called for them to be prosecuted. Impeachment is a political tool most of the time. The one exception, I voted for impeachment, and we successfully removed some federal judges during my time. Federal judges have a lifetime appointment, and on occasions they will do terrible things. They'll be corrupt, there'll be substance abusers, there'll be spousal abusers, and the only way to get them out is in fact to impeach and remove them. And that's very bipartisan. We go through a process and we reach a consensus. And that's why Nancy Pelosi, when she was describing what should have happened, what she thought would happen, is what has happened in every successful impeachment, which is that you bring overwhelming evidence, you determine that
Of a crime committed.
Of a high crime or misdemeanor under the Constitution. And one of the reasons, for example, is, we had a judge who committed battery, actually caught on video, wouldn't resign. The legal penalties for doing it may not be sufficient to remove him from office, and they've been adjudicated. They've been held accountable for a crime potentially, and yet they're still there and they're unfit to serve. And so that's why we always say it's a political decision, not just a legal decision. And oddly enough, we have one member of Congress who was a federal judge who was impeached and removed, and then ran for office and became a long-serving congressman, Alcee Hastings of Florida. And he was clearly corrupt, but he beat the rap in court. And just because he had beat the charges on, some would say, a technicality, didn't mean that Congress under John Conyers wasn't going to hold him accountable. Now, this was a black Democrat and a black Democrat determining that this judge was not fit. And Chairman John Conyers was part of the process of removing Alcee Hastings. And so I served with these two men, and they were never quite the same. But so we go back to the whole process. If there's overwhelming evidence, if the person is unfit, and if the crime or wrongdoing is undeniable, then you have the case. What we have with President Trump is exactly what we had with the very first impeachment of Andrew Johnson after the Civil War, where he was president. President Lincoln had been assassinated. He was clearly the president, and he fired his Secretary of War, and they impeached and almost removed him because they didn't like him and they did like the Secretary of War. Well, for all of your viewers, you would look and say, wait a second, a member of the cabinet works for the president. How could you not be able to fire him? And wouldn't it be silly to have the cabinet for 3 years not be able to be changed because the first president died? It was an absurd impeachment. Well, this is equally absurd. Even if we disagree with everything the president stands for, even if you don't agree with him, did he have the right to conduct foreign policy? Absolutely. Did he have the right to emphasize anti-corruption? Absolutely. Did he have a right and an obligation to withhold those funds until he was satisfied? It's in the legislation.
And did he discharge the money within the time Congress allowed?
He clearly
Which he
did. The important thing
But
that
it is obstruction of Congress, is that real?
it's absolutely real, and every
But is it
president.
a crime?
Well, let's take, for example, name a president. Has there been a president going back? You only go back if you're lucky to the
Only to Obama.
Only to Obama. That's right. They had to drive you here. You're not yet
That's
16. But each of the presidents, certainly, let's go back just to Reagan. Each of the presidents, and by the way, it goes back to the very first presidents, have claimed a privilege of their office before Congress. Every single one of them. President Obama in Fast and Furious, in this gun running, claimed a privilege of all the documents we were asking for, and it wasn't until we got in front of a federal judge, we had to hold Eric Holder in contempt. We had to refer it to the U.S. attorney, who Eric Holder said, the president's claimed privilege, don't prosecute it. We then had to go to a judge and request a civil action. We got a judge who had been just recently appointed by President Obama, Amy Berman Jackson. We went through 6 or 7 months before she finally ruled that she needed to look at the documents that they were claiming privilege on in camera. In other words, see them herself to see if they were appropriate. At that point, President Obama's people and Eric Holder's people released thousands of documents, and that they no longer even wanted to have the judge consider it because they were so much not appropriate to be withheld. They then did submit in camera some documents, and a huge portion of those by Amy Berman Jackson, a recent Obama appointee, were ordered to be turned over to us. So they were withholding documents that clearly they shouldn't have, and even the ones that they fought for, they lost. Was that obstruction? Or was it a struggle between the two branches in which the court was asked to decide? The latter is obvious. President Obama would not say he obstructed. They lied to us. They slow-walked us. It took years to get through the whole Fast and Furious process, just as it did with Benghazi. But we didn't try to impeach President Obama. We didn't try to impeach Eric Holder. We held him in contempt for refusing to give us the documents. And by the way, he had agreed to give us the documents if we'd stop investigating. He would give us a few hundred documents. And that was the outrage of the whole thing, is that he wanted to make it go away by giving us a few documents, but he wasn't going to give us those documents unless it went away. And we couldn't see them before we decided. So all that behavior was clearly wrong. But if you measure the struggle between the president, where he's claiming immunity, saying, take me to court if you want to, is that obstruction? No. The other charge against him is abuse of power. Every president uses power. If the power they use is within their constitutional authority, then by definition it's not an abuse of power, it's a use of power. We may object to it, we may say it's too much. There's a famous statement attributed to Teddy Roosevelt, because Congress didn't have a lot of money. He built the Great White Fleet, and he wanted to show it off. And Congress said, well, we're not appropriating the money. And he's alleged to have said, well, I'll send the fleet anywhere I want. You can pay to get them home. And that has been the attitude of all of our presidents, both great and not so great. So as a longtime member of Congress and a serious, if you will, upholder of the Constitution, the struggle is real, the authority is real, and the idea that you would impeach for use of power you object to would tear down our Constitution. We cannot impeach somebody when we disagree with them. We can go to the courts and get a court order, and if the court orders it and they don't comply with the court, then appropriately action such as impeachment would be bipartisan at that point.
Sure. Now, people have equated what's gone on recently with the embassy and Soleimani with Benghazi.
Absolutely.
Tell us.
It's absolutely the same thing, except this is a fortress properly built, properly guarded, prepared for this kind of attack. And the response by the president and by our Marines with the special MAGTF all were appropriate. We've learned the lessons of Benghazi. Don't have a facility. No lives were lost. And if lives were lost, it wouldn't be lost so easily. Benghazi was a place we shouldn't have been as far as the facility. It was not properly defended. It was not properly prepared. And they were not honest in those 13 hours in which no one came and people died. So is there a similarity? Yes. And there will be more. We have an embassy in Beirut up on a hill. It's a large embassy, but ultimately Hezbollah dominates that country, and there's no question at all it could be attacked. We have moved military personnel nearby. We are prepared to defend and evacuate if necessary. And that's what you've got to do. So yes, the similarity.
We should have taken out Soleimani as a preemptive strike.
We should have taken him out 10 to 20 years ago.
Really?
This is a man who has American blood on his hands. His notoriety on behalf of Iranians, his flying around the world after, and remember, the Europeans have already limited his travel. He couldn't go to Europe. The fact is, he has American blood on his hands. Effectively, he's been marked for years as somebody who's eligible, as eligible as Osama bin Laden to be killed. Should he have been taken on Iraqi soil on that day? That's a decision the president made. Should he have been taken out years ago as someone who was orchestrating the killing of Americans? His activities where he, in 2006, when the Israelis put up with thousands of missiles, rockets, and mortars landing in Haifa and beyond for months. That was part of a strategy that he had worked. His activities emboldening Bashar Assad, absolutely. One of the defenders of him has been, well, he helped wipe out ISIS. He also helped create ISIS. Mm-hmm. The mistreatment by the Shia in Iraq after they took power helped create ISIS. Sunni extremism is not going to go away if Shia mistreatment continues. You have to push both sides, like two kids fighting in a schoolyard. You can't just tell one they're bad. You've got to get both of them to lay down their arms. But having said that, look, Iran has been our enemy, and we have been at war since they took our embassy over in 1979. To say that we're not on a war footing with Iran since 1979 would be erroneous. Remember, Jimmy Carter planned and tried to execute a military taking back of our hostages. It failed, but he was willing to do it. And these strikes are not uncommon. In 1986, best memory, President Reagan did a strike that could have killed Gaddafi. It killed what he called his adopted family in a military facility. But the strike was intended to take Gaddafi out. And it definitely woke him up to the fact that President Reagan had had enough after the Lockerbie bombing and so on. So when people commit terrorist acts, the expectation that sooner or later somebody will, have a reprisal should be inevitable. It's just that it had waited a long time, perhaps way too long. When someone when somebody's a colonel in killing Americans, they should be gone, not when they're a decade-long general.
Right. What do you think about the president's support for Israel? How important is it for us to support Israel?
Since President Truman, every American has said they support Israel. Every president that I know of has said that Jerusalem is the appropriate capital, particularly since the retaking of Jerusalem, in a defensive war. The amazing thing is the president did what the previous three presidents had all said they were going to do, which is he moved a large plaque from Tel Aviv to the consulate in Jerusalem and said, this is now the embassy. And I think it's a very small thing, and I'm not trying to belittle it because it's a big thing at the same time. But the building was already there. Our people, our ambassador, was constantly working out of Jerusalem. His meetings were in Jerusalem, which had been the seat of government most of the year for decades, recognizing that the future of the two-state solution includes a capital of Israel in Jerusalem, is all the president did. It's only a bold and distinctive move because every president promised and only he did it. But it's also the pathway for Jared, his son-in-law, and others who are working on the peace process to say, this president wants peace, but he's going to go forward with promises and commitments, and you need to get on board. And it's a wake-up call to a very corrupt Palestinian authority who has not served their people well for generations, but certainly for the 20 years since the first time I met Yasser Arafat, a very corrupt individual for whom peace was going to be elusive and for whom his people suffered because of him.
Let's talk about the economy. Are you, as a businessman, are you surprised at the record-breaking stock market and unemployment rates and all that?
If taxes are a factor, but I will tell you, regulatory relief, which this president has championed across the board, the fact that instead of facing new regulations you don't know how to deal with and causing you to choose to take your business to another country, knowing that not only will there not be any new ones, but many of the most onerous ones are being rolled back. That's creating an investment environment. And certainly the banks are responding and the international community is responding. We get to charge interest in this country. Sovereign wealth funds in countries from Switzerland to Japan have negative interest. They're begging people to take their money because there they can't get investment. Here we can.
Do you believe that we can continue with this record pace of growth and low unemployment, given USMCA, the China trade agreement, Japan, South Korea, other things? Do you think those will?
There's always going to be a business cycle, but we can continue to be the envy of the world. We can continue to outperform the world. So if the world's in a global recession, can we be flat? And as the world comes back, can we be at 3 and 4 and 5%? Absolutely. When I was in business, what I learned was that if your product is slightly better than your competition, you get about all the business you want. Mm-hmm. And if it's slightly less good than your competition, they come to you only after they bought all of the other guy's stuff. That's where we are. We're better. We're a better place to do business. So with these policies, with deregulation, with controlling the growth of government and the growth of taxes, we inevitably can grow faster than the rest of the world. And so the idea that we're going to have a 3% growth or better for the rest of the second term of President Obama, absolutely. But let's remember, historically, we stay in good times until somebody does something stupid. The recession that we enjoyed during President George H.W. Bush's term, Daddy Bush, if you will, had a lot to do with the largest tax increase in American history. It had to do with undoing the 1986, 82, and 86 tax changes that had spurred under Reagan a growth and optimism for this country. So a recession is not inevitable, except that bad policy is inevitable, and therefore we will someday have a recession. But as long as we keep these positive policies and we're better than the rest of the world, we will continue to grow and prosper.
What do you think the tax increases that Warren and Sanders are talking about, what kind of effect do you think those would have on our growth? The
growth of government takes away people's incentive to invest themselves. And so, we can look at some economic model, but the fact is this power grab of doubling the size of government from 25% of everything we have to 50% is essentially saying socialism. Because at some point you can have a little, even Cuba has some free enterprise. But when the majority becomes the government instead of the individual, you are no longer a free market society. And that's what Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and for that matter, all the candidates, major candidates, are pretty well talking about.
Last thing, what is your thoughts on the wall?
One of the greatest things that I inherited was time with Duncan Hunter, the father, because he was the father of that fence we call a wall today. It started off as he had to get military personnel in their spare time, basically, especially reservists during the summer, to weld together surplus metal to create that fence. But what he knew back in 1991 was that three things were happening. Border crime, with people running over the border, including, sure, they were trafficking in drugs and they were trafficking in people, but they were also coming over the border robbing and going back into Mexico with impunity, whether it was stealing cars or robbing houses. He knew that, in fact, many people, including people who were illegally immigrating, were being robbed and sometimes killed. He knew that San Diego was a dangerous place because Tijuana was a dangerous place. As he got that fence up, the first 14 miles of fence, we became the safest border city in America. Well, Tijuana, even today, is the murder capital of Mexico, with almost 300 murders last year. So here we have the most dangerous city, the safest city. That's what the fence has done for us, and the triple fence as it's becoming. And so whether you call it a wall or a defense, it is in fact dual purpose. It makes America safer. It allows us to control the process of people legally coming through the border. It reduces the amount of drugs coming in, and it stems the flow of illegal immigration. All of that is the benefit, and that's why I remain committed to it. And even Duncan Hunter continues to speak on it today and will for the rest of his life. It's made America safer. It's made San Diego safer.
Okay. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I know there's a primary going on, and I know that in a primary, everyone's supposed to appeal to their base. But one of the things I learned in 18 years of doing this is that virtually every piece of legislation that gets to the president and is signed because people come together to get things done, Republicans and Democrats. A few minutes ago, we were talking about the border wall. One of the things that I'm very proud of that we were able to do during my time in Congress was Juan Vargas and I were able to expand the ports of entry, the legal ports of entry, to increase commerce. And with USMCA, it's going to increase more. That's good for San Diego. Legal commerce, legal passing of people done efficiently. And so, one of the things that I think gets lost in political battles is that when this race is over, whoever goes to Washington has to be a statesman. National defense is number one. and being fair about what it takes to protect our men and women who protect us. Promoting the economy and recognizing that you have your battles with the other party, but you get things done because you're able to find things that are in the common good. And I think that's the most important thing that gets lost in these things. And I've been around long enough to know that those who lose it don't add to the process. The people who get things done in Washington are ones who will be partisan, and I'm partisan. But after the fight, after that part, you also want to make sure that you give the American people honest government that serves them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to
It's my
talk to us.
pleasure. Thank you.